Islam has a doctrine of lying. So it has a very clear doctrine of how to lie, when to lie, who to lie to. So the Muslims were very much tied up with the Nazis. There were 8 Muslim SS units in the Balkans in the Soviet Union. Now, the largest Nazi SS unit was the Muslim unit. The highest reward for a lay Muslim is given when you die in jihad. This is not ISIS Islam. This is your neighbor's Islam. The question is he following it today? Well, good. If he isn't, but maybe tomorrow. You never know.
Motivated and underrated, I feel elated when I touch the stage. Everybody going crazy. I'm hip to the game, so don't you try to play me.
Welcome to Yoel's Hangouts podcast. I'm your host, Yoel. We got a very special guest here today. His name is Lloyd D. Young. Am I saying your last name properly? What's the origin of your last name?
My father's family settled in South Africa from Holland, and we've got records in the archives going back to about 1693. So it's De Jong.
Wow.
So
De Jong.
Dutch.
Okay. Wow, that's cool. But yeah, guys, so this guy is someone that, I stumbled upon going into Sam, I don't know how do you say his last name? Shamoon?
Shamoon.
Sam Shamoon. He's, as some of you guys know, I'm a Christian, so he does a lot of apologetics. He educates a lot of people, and he featured Lloyd on his channel. I stumbled upon him. I thought his perspective and the information was, one, really accurate, but also really interesting, and things that a lot of people don't talk about, as far as the history of Islam, even, Palestine, Israel, biblical stuff, different denominations, Martin Luther. And I just, I reached out, and he was, humble enough and cool enough to come on the show. Lloyd, we appreciate your time. Thank you for being here.
No, thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Of course, man. So how did you get into deep dives, I guess, is kind of your why I stumbled upon your stuff. How did you get into that? Why are you so good at that?
That's I've always had an obsession with detail, I think. And my previous profession, when I lived and worked in the Middle East, I had to do analysis of environments and situations to decide on what's the best way to design, let's say, a security system, or to what's the best way to prevent an attack before it happened. So I was involved in the design of security systems and surveillance systems to predict and prevent attacks, so early warning systems. So the aim was not to react after the fact, but design something before. So you had to really think through the mind of the person that would attack a site. And so you had to work through the scenarios, and one of the important things when you're looking at how a crime is going to be committed is, how are they going to deceive you? How are they going to mislead you? So that means that you run through this process of analysis, and you start to find little details that don't match. You start to find, it's like being a detective in a way. And I think I bring some of this into what I'm doing. And what sparked me was I was doing a counterterrorism course online through a university in Holland, Leiden University. And what was odd is that the rector, or the dean of the department, refused to accept, no matter what evidence was presented, that the Muslim Brotherhood was anything other than benign. And I'm assuming that they were funding his department. Mm-hmm. So I was eventually banned from the group. I wasn't allowed to comment or speak or do anything, simply because after the fall of Raqqa, I presented material which was taken from the Islamic training of these terrorists. And this was standard Orthodox Islam. And I started speaking about the Sharia manuals. Often you hear about, we want Sharia for Britain, we want Sharia for America. We want Sharia courts. And what is this famous Sharia? No one seems to really know. So I studied it in depth. I looked through the sources, and I found that the terrorist Sunni sources were the standard sources that were being taught at Islamic universities like Al-Azhar and at Medina in Saudi Arabia. And not, let's say, very, very short order, when I started posting these things and discussing them on the counterterrorism forum, I was banned. Now, we were able to talk about Christian terrorism, Buddhist terrorism, came to Islamic terrorism, they shut me down and kicked my ass out so fast. And this compelled me to start to talk about these issues, because I was annoyed.
Yeah, wow. So Sharia, I mean, you're saying it properly, but I think maybe people are probably going to like Sharia is like how we hear about it in the news in America. Um, so in Iran, and again, I'm not as smart as you by any means, but in Iran, would you say that, people talk about, oh, like Sharia law, they're extremists in Iran. Are they being extreme the way they, I guess,
No, they're just
extreme? Are
being
they?
orthodox.
Okay.
There's I have to provide a few terms, a couple of terms and definitions, and I'll simplify it. Within Islam, there's a range of acceptable behaviors. For each of these limits of behavior, you get recognition and you get reward from Allah because both are following the will of Allah. So on the one end, you have what we call extreme, which is azima, which is strictness. You are simply following the law of Allah and Muhammad, the Sharia, strictly. Then you have rukhsa on the other end, which is dispensation, a loosening, a relaxation of the law. So Muslims that are just being moderate are simply following the doctrine of rukhsa, and they are earning reward for that. Now, what people don't realize is that Islam isn't based on the concept that we have in the West of logos. It's a completely different way of thinking. It's a different mindset. So, for instance, the difference between rukhsa and azima can be complete opposites. So you could literally violate the law of Islam and still be following Islam because you're following the law of rukhsa. So you are following dispensation. Now, of course, the one who follows strictly is getting more credit, more reward from Allah. And of course, according to Sharia law, a certain limited number of Muslims have to follow Islam strictly, or all Muslims will fall into sin and corruption and be cast into hell. Allah will turn his back on them. So the extremists must exist, or Islam becomes apostate. Hopefully that makes sense. There's more doctrine I can add to that, but these are all covered in my channel. Well, there's one more thing I can add, and I'll be very blunt. Islam has a doctrine of lying. So it has a very clear doctrine of how to lie, when to lie, who to lie to. So it has a very distinct doctrine of lying, multiple different kinds of lying. And unfortunately, within this, lying is legal in Islam. In fact, it is obligatory, it is compulsory. So compounding the fact of having this doctrine of azima and rukhsa, you've also got the fact that if something will embarrass Islam, you must lie because you may not embarrass Islam. So therefore, you don't know if someone's telling the truth. So this adds to, just complicates the matter further.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. And that doesn't mean all people that are Muslim are, lying or anything like that. I mean, I think my audience is relatively, and I think we can be adults here and not do these like, well, not everybody, Thank God we don't have like a live chat or anything. I post this after so we don't get distracted. Yeah. So I was talking to this girl. She's from Jordan. And, there's a lot of Palestinians in Jordan, and they had a perspective on, the history of Israel and how it was founded. And, they all had the same story. They all had this, the bad Jews came here, they did this, and it was an atrocity. And I'm sure there were some bad things. And then she said, well, I don't know why they would lie. Like, why would they lie? Why would they all lie? Like, I don't think that, there's certain propaganda, there's certain things that I study in school, but I don't know why they would lie. And I was like, well, if you want to get like an unbiased perspective, why don't you talk to also, maybe people that were here on the Israel's side to have a conversation and see what their perspective is. She's like, well, I don't know why they would lie. Like, why would they lie? And, I have heard that before, that in Islam, dependent on the circumstance, and if it's like questioning their ethos or Allah, they're allowed to lie. And I know that there's certain instances, like, for example, because for me, I grew up relatively Christian, also with the Jewish kind of brush on my mom's side. So the concept of like religious endorsed lying is something that's like so intuitive to religion and God in general.
It's counterintuitive to Western religion, to Christianity. So another thing is that you must realize the word dawah. So Muslims practice dawah. And when you go through the Islamic sources, you'll find that dawah is the equivalent of propaganda. Propaganda is political rhetoric, not necessarily associated with the truth. So dawah is propaganda. So understand that this is propaganda and it is legal and obligatory, compulsory to lie. So now this is something that you'd have to go through the Islamic Sharia sources. You'd have to go to the highest rank of scholars, the most historically sound and valid and trusted scholars. You'd have to go to the sources that when you become an imam or a qadi or a sheikh, these are the books that they study to qualify.
You
Because
know what's
people only
funny
know the
that
Quran. Yeah.
I was just gonna I'll let you finish your point, but you know what, it reminds me of I was watching these videos about Scientology, and this one lady that just came out of Scientology, she was like, yeah, well, you know, once you reach this next level, they give you more information, and then you reach this next level, and they tell you, you know, really what it means to be this next level of, you know, Scientology or whatever. And I'm like, dang, that sounds very familiar. It sounds like, you know, a fraternity. It sounds like, you know, a secret society. It's like there's always like the thing you need to do to get to that next level, to get more information. And then they try to see if you qualify for the additional information. It's like, this is like cult 101 in my opinion.
Okay, I'm glad you raised that. Let me look up a source. So then you talked about different levels. Let me just find something for you on that. Now, I have a much lengthier presentation on Islamic law called the Muslim Talmud. And I deliberately call it the Muslim Talmud because it is Islam is borrowed from numerous different religious traditions and sources. So it has taken from Babylonian paganism, it has taken from Gnosticism, it has taken from Christianity, it has taken from Judaism. And when they wanted to create their own identity, they were competing with Judaism. They were the new Jews, they were the new Christians, and therefore they took the Talmud and they modified it to suit their purposes. You spoke of levels in Islam. So Islam has 2 divisions and 4 levels. So the divisions are legislative and spiritual. Now, few people realize, and again, I will say very bluntly, and these things are covered in my videos where I go in depth through the Islamic sources that are learned by the scholars in university. And if you don't like that, you need to ask the Islamic scholars and the Islamic universities why they teach these things. But the spiritual aspect of Islam is Gnostic. Islam claims explicitly in the Sharia, not ambiguously, explicitly, to be a Gnostic religion. It is Gnostic. So you've got the legislative and you have the spiritual. Now, the spiritual aspect or the Gnostic aspect of Islam is restricted to an elite. They call them the elect, just like they do in Calvinism, the elect. And then, of course, the legislative is where you've got your lower level scholars who have to administer the law of Allah, because Islam is not a religion according to its own definition. According to Islam's own definition, it is a legal system, like socialism, like Nazism.
Where's that? Where's that in? Is that in the Quran? Is that in the Hadiths? Like
So the Quran is something you need to look beyond the Quran. The Quran is a very small book, has very little detail that must be supported by other texts. Right? The Quran has been exegeted and it's been expanded and explained within the Sharia. The Sharia is the Sharia supersedes the Quran. It explains and clarifies and provides the consensus, what they call the ijma. So as I said, so the Sharia means the obeying of Allah, how to obey Allah. It is the outer exoteric. So it's the outer practice of Islam. On the opposite side, the Haqiqa is the knowing of Allah, the secret knowledge. It is the inner esoteric subjective sense of Allah, the direct personal connection with Allah through using rituals to gain entrance into Allah's throne room, and so on and so on and so on. So it's the gnosis of Allah. Then you've got 4 levels. At the very lowest level, you have what's called the Ibadah, the literal, or the Zahir, which scholars call Islam for the masses. So this is the Islam that is the practice of the legislative subjects, your average Muslim. Then at a slightly higher level, you have the Ishara, implied allusion, so for the legislative practitioners. Then you have the Lataif, the nuances or subtleties. That's for your highest level or higher level of spiritual practitioners. And then your highest levels of Muslims, they follow the Haqqa'iq, which is reality, truth, divine essence. But this is beyond truth. So this is for your advanced spiritual practitioners, your top level, your elite within the Muslim hierarchy. But also the Haqqa'iq is, man, to simplify it, and hopefully not to oversimplify it, but Muhammad is what the universe is made of. Allah made Muhammad out of himself. Muhammad is made from the same substance as Allah, and the universe was made for Muhammad. The earth was made for Muhammad, but also from Muhammad. The earth is made from Muhammad. Everyone is made from Muhammad. The prophets are made from Muhammad. The light of the prophets, the light of Abraham, David, the light of Jesus, these are all just fractions, little pieces taken from Muhammad's light so that they represent a sample of Muhammad's light. And this is how
I thought Muhammad was just a man. Like I didn't know he had like any sort of like divinity or like superpowers or
you need to read what is known as the Sirah. These are effectively the Gospels of Muhammad. They're often called the biographies. When you read the Sirah of Muhammad, and these things win prizes. I mean, give me one sec. These books win prizes, and these describe to you the miraculous nature of Muhammad. Muhammad as a god, Muhammad as a deity. In fact, when you read the Sirah, Muhammad is the real Jesus. Muhammad is literally made from the same essence as Allah. So therefore, Muhammad effectively is the partner of Allah.
Now, you said the Sharia law. Is that something that people have? Like how? Like the average Muslim, do they have access to that, or like how closely do they follow it, or what's the relationship like an average Muslim has?
It's illegal for Muslims to speak about the Sharia. It's not legal for them to talk about it. It's considered treason for you to reveal, because the Sharia is effectively the operational plan. It's the doctrine, the truth of the doctrine, the consensus, the ijma, where all of the different groups converge. And they're not allowed to reveal this to you because you are not an initiate. But also certain levels of it, as we saw within the levels, you are not at the higher levels, so therefore, you have less knowledge, and as you proceed up the levels, you get more knowledge. And so they cannot reveal the Sharia to you. But once you look at the Sharia and you look at the actual laws, like how do they exegete? How do the Muslim scholars, how do they traditionally exegete these verses in the Quran? For instance, you might have one verse in the Quran, like if you look at the chopping off of hands, I mean, there's 1 or 2 verses in the Quran that speak about that. But if you go into just one Sharia manual, there'll be like 55 pages discussing it. So then they've taken that and they've exegeted it. They've explained it in every possible permutation and provided general rules and provided specific rules. So they've taken 1 or 2 verses in the Quran and they've written like 55 pages of detailed explanation of how and when and who gets their hands chopped off and what are the...
Kind of like the Talmud a little bit?
Sorry?
Kind of like the Talmud, like how it's like they take these certain things, they expand on it in the Talmud, kind of, but like their own version of it, I guess.
Yeah, but very different. Okay. The two are not the same. I know I called in my show, I call it the Muslim Talmud, but this is not to say it's a one-to-one correlation to the Talmud. That it is not.
No, definitely not.
But, but this is a genuine set of laws. It's a legal system, and the thing is, when they take over the country, they are going to replace the Western legal system with the Sharia. Now, this doesn't mean they can't do this over time, piecemeal, 1% by 1% at a time. It doesn't mean they have to do it all at once. And don't forget that this is there's like a curve they're on. So over time, eventually, they need to be 100% Sharia compliant, but not today. It start at 1%, then 2%, then 3%, and so on. It builds. Remember that azimat rukhsa, strictness and leniency. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, I guess let's localize it a little bit, because I don't think, my audience, I think they probably know as much as me about this stuff, which is not a ton. But I'm kind of starting to learn a little bit more. So localizing it, I'm in Israel right now. Let's kind of have a conversation as far as what the history of, Palestine, I guess, is, or from what you've researched. I mean, anybody else can throw their hat in the ring and have these conversations and do their research. But you've made an interesting link. I don't want to kind of give it away, but it's something that I think people that live here would be really interested in kind of hearing the history of things, because a lot of our textbooks, they are kind of politically correct and don't cover certain things that are uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what exactly do you want me to clarify?
So the link, I would say the link between Palestine and kind of the start of it, and then also the I guess the relationship that I forget what his name was, but the from the Soviet Union and even Hitler's
Oh,
connection to.
you're referring to one of the previous talks that I gave on this. Um, yeah, I did a couple of detailed talks. There's one talk on my channel called the Palestinian occupation of Israel,
Yeah,
and
super interesting.
that yeah, that would be useful because the thing is I can't remember all the facts all the time, so I have these references. I mean, this is one very long, just a list of things, but then I convert these into presentations. But very briefly, then, um,
Yeah, definitely go on his
to
channel, guys. Like, if you want to go, like, I kind of want to make this episode kind of like snapshots of different things that you cover, because we're not going to get it all covered in the short time. But I want to just kind of show people the depth of the
yeah,
things that you cover.
yeah. So there are direct links between the Palestinians, as they are called, and the Nazis. So here you've got Haj Amin al Husseini, who was a guest of Adolf Hitler in Berlin for some years, some time. And of course, he volunteered to become a member of the SS and he was made a general. So he raised troops and he fought for the Nazis. He was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem back in the day. And of course, so something like 660,000 Muslims fought on the side of the Nazis, which few people realize. Few
Wow.
people realize that nearly 700,000 Muslims apparently fought on the side of the Nazis. Let me actually just go here. For instance,
How many?
let
How
me
many?
just
And as you're doing that, like, I'm just trying to think. Like, I always try to think of when I get new information or information that might surprise me or may make me feel uncomfortable. I'm like, how many of these particular group of people? How many of them actually know this history? Like, is it something
very
that they
few.
know?
It's
They're
not
not.
spoken about openly because, okay, a couple of things. In Islam, Muslims are not allowed to speak ill of Islam. This is blasphemy, right? This is blasphemy, but also it's illegal. It goes against the Sharia. And again, I speak about this at length in my shows, and I go through the Sharia rulings. I show the laws from the books. I'm always showing the rulings on the screen, and I provide the books for people to download and read for themselves. So I always make the resources available for everyone to go read it for themselves. But so here you've got all of these troops. This is a German article, right? Uh, that says Hitler had a lot of love for Islam, but you're not allowed to slander Islam. Now, to slander Islam, now in the West, to slander is to tell a lie, to smear someone unfairly. Whereas the definition of slander, ghibba, in Islam is very different. Slander in Islam legally is to tell something that is true but is embarrassing to that person. That is
Mm,
slander. So to
mm.
tell the truth in Islam that someone would not want revealed, that is considered slander. So this is known as ghibba, and this is an issue within Islam. So in other words, and also the Sharia is also binding upon you as a non-Muslim. So it's not just binding upon Muslims; it's binding upon non-Muslims, and they must make it binding upon you. So ah, I just hit the wrong
Interesting.
button. So let me
It's all
just
good. Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, because there isn't really anything like I can speak for. I mean, I grew up in a Christian and Jewish kind of household. There isn't really anything that is like that from what I know, from what I've read.
for some reason that's
So it's like I've just never heard of anything like that. It's very interesting, and it kind of makes sense. Like, you can see kind of a little bit of PR going on, especially when it comes to the conflict. There's a lot of like, hey, this is what's happening, when in reality, it might not be the case, but
oh,
kind of lying is like a
let me go
slippery
back.
slope.
Sorry. Yeah. So
There you go.
just to verify what I was saying. So, for instance, here's a different context, but the rule applies generally. So, if he notices something good, it is sunnah to mention it. But if he notices something bad, it is unlawful to mention it because this is slander. See, there's a very different definition of slander. So let me close this. Now, slander and the meaning of slander. So this is in the Reliance of the Traveler. This is the most popular Islamic law manual in the world. And this was also being used by ISIS and so on. And when I put this book into the forum and I started discussing Islamic law, and this being one of the primary manuals taught to the ISIS troops by the ISIS imams, that's when I got banned. So, so slander. See here? Slander, ghibba, means to mention anything concerning a person that he would dislike. Not to lie about him, not to mention an untruth. See, that's a very different legal definition. So to say something about Islam. So the Muslims were very much tied up with the Nazis, right? For instance, the SS, the Nazi SS, which was the private army that belonged to Hitler, there were 8 Muslim SS units in the Balkans in the Soviet Union. Now, the largest Nazi SS unit was the Muslim unit
Wow.
called the Hanshar, right? Um, Now, this, for instance, was a hard to deny Holocaust your father saved the Jews from, because here you've got Muslims who actually saved some Jews, and they're considered as righteous among the Gentiles. So that's very, very interesting, right? Then, for instance, Palestinians gave Jews safe haven, but that's a discussion for another time. Okay, there's discussions about they know that the Mufti led lots of troops, and how the Nazis obviously caught the Islamic world during World War II. So there's plenty of evidence if you want to look at it and go through it. I mean, you can see here Heil Hitler from this good old Muslim here, hanging out with the heads of the SS, the heads of the German Air Force, Goering, Himmler, and so on.
And who is this
So
guy with the hat?
this
With
dude
the
here,
white? Yeah.
the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini.
Wow. Okay.
This is Heinrich Himmler, SS commander. Warm wishes to Mufti Hajj Amin al-Husseini. So
Wow.
here he is with these Nazi troops, checking out the troops, and Islam und Judentum, Islam and the Jews, or Islam and
Wow.
Jewry. So these are Muslims with their little death's head icons. These are Ottomans, so Muslims. So you can see that they were very much bound up with the Islam and the Nazi Germany war. So yeah, and this is all based on Islamic doctrine. Because
Yeah, I was gonna say because I was watching something. It was I couldn't believe this person said this out loud. It was the Patrick Bet David podcast.
Yep.
You've seen that, yeah. Did you see the recent debate between kind of like, I guess, like 2 Muslims and then 2 people that had kind of wrote books discussing
Daniel
like the concerns?
Pikachu and someone else. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
watched like a couple of minutes of it at most.
It was
I
hard.
mean,
It
I
was
know
a
what
little
they're
hard to
gonna.
watch in the beginning. I'm not gonna lie. It was very
Yeah,
hard to watch. But what was interesting about it, I had to watch it because this one guy, he was from Morocco and he was Muslim, and then he converted to Christianity, but then ended up leaving because he ended up trying to leave because he was being threatened to be killed essentially, and one might say, okay, well, that's extreme. It's a barbaric, third world country. It's just, violence happens. It's just probably war torn. There's a bunch of excuses that happen when people say, oh, he was killed because of this. But on that very show, one of the Muslims that was there, he was like, hey, so, part of being in Sharia law, it says to kill people that convert out of Islam. And he was like, well, do you think do you think you'd be a good Muslim if you killed me? And then he was like, yeah, I mean, if I'm following for me to be a good Muslim, I have to kill you. And he was like, wait, so you're saying right now that you should, under proper Islam, you should kill me right now because I left Islam? And
yes,
he's like,
that's
yes.
true. Look, let's have a look here. For instance, this is Sharia, right? Now, this is ISIS did these things because they were following Islam strictly, azima, right? Let's have a look. A Muslim who holds the prayer to be obligatory, but through lack of concern neglects to perform it, has not committed unbelief, thank heavens. Rather, he is executed, washed, prayed over, and buried in the Muslim cemetery. This is strict
Whoa.
Islam. If you forget the prayer, you are killed. This is what ISIS did with their people if they forgot to do the prayers. They neglected, they were killed. So ISIS is not an abomination. ISIS is practicing Islam strictly. So let me continue here.
They're labeled as extremists, but maybe extremists relative to not to Islam, apparently.
Yeah. Okay, hold on. Let me just go back one.
And for those listening right now, he's pulling up archives, so this isn't just his opinion. He's not. And you guys have the right to look up his sources. Please follow his
These
channel.
are the laws. This is the reliance of the traveler. So if you go to any one of my videos, in the description box, there's a link to the reliance of the traveler. It is the most common, the most popular, most readily available Islamic law manual in English in the world. It contains rulings from all four schools of fiqh, the recognized four schools of fiqh. It shows what is the ijma, which is the consistency across all four schools, which is about 80% the same. The 20% that where they differ, this is just cosmetic stuff. Like, do you hold your hands here when you pray? Do you hold it by your belly? That doesn't matter. Those are cosmetic issues. Now, for instance, killing an apostate from Islam is without consequences. And it shows us here a father or mother or their fathers or mothers or their grandparents for killing their offspring or offspring's offspring. So there is no consequence according to the Islamic law for killing your own children. And there is no indemnity for killing an apostate, since it is killing someone who deserves to die. Did I read that wrong, Joel?
Whoa, no.
Or you
There's
Did I read that?
Wow. Jeez. This is proper.
This is
Islam.
normal Islam. Standard, regular, common or garden variety Islam. This is not ISIS Islam. This is your neighbor's Islam. The question is he following it today? Well, good. If he isn't, but maybe tomorrow. You never know. That's the problem.
that's
This is
tough.
the law. This is the law of Allah. So whether he's practicing it, that can be debated. But this is the law of Allah.
Wow. And what's tough is even if you have a conversation with somebody like this, it's in their doctrine to lie. They have permission
Yes.
at least to lie. I'm not saying they all lie and you can't listen to them or trust them, but
Yeah.
they have religiously, sanctioned, I guess, lie.
Yeah.
Lying
Well, when a
abilities.
person, law 8.1, section O, which is justice, 8.1, when a person who has reached puberty and is sane voluntarily apostatizes from Islam, he deserves to be killed. And it says here, under Sunni jurisprudence, ask him to repent. If he refuses, he is immediately killed. Now, understand that different schools will differ. For instance, the one school will say, give them 3 days. The other school will say, do it on the spot. Another one will say, give them 24 hours. That is where the differences between the schools come in. They all say that you die. The one says, burn him. The other one says, drown him. The other one says, choke him to death. The other one says, chop off his head. The other one says, starve him to death. The fact is that at the end of the day, you know what the punishment is. You understand?
Yeah. Wow. So that's tough. So what would you say? I mean, let's kind of, I guess, localize it a little bit. I don't know how much I feel like you have studied the Israel-Palestine conflict. I mean, I'm in Israel right now. I think it'd be obviously kind of interesting. In their doctrine, we can talk about the political backdrops or the religious backdrops, but it seems like they come in and if someone from the Palestinian territories, they come in and they kill an innocent person, it doesn't matter if they're young, old, woman, man, it doesn't matter. And they know they're going to die. I don't think anybody that commits, any sort of terrorist attack in Israel doesn't know they're going to die. They know they're going to die. And then back home, they're martyrs, they're celebrated, people hand out candies. What I guess would you say from a religious perspective? Is there anything because they're not all Muslims, but I mean, I would say like a lot, like maybe in the 99%, they're Muslims. So is there anything that cosigns that? Is that just like where do you think that may come from? Or
You
I don't
mean,
know.
why the aggression? Like,
Say it again.
why the aggression? And because they earn
Yeah.
reward for killing and being killed in the name of Allah, they earn reward for that. So let me briefly touch on this. Okay, so this section is commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. Now, you as a Christian, there's the Great Commission. Go out unto all men and preach the gospel, right? Converting all men in the name of Jesus Christ, right? That's the Great Commission from a Christian perspective. Islam also has a Great Commission. It is called commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. Commanding the right is to enforce the right, which is the will of Allah. The will of Allah is found in the Sharia. That is the right. The wrong is whatever you happen to believe. Are you a Muslim? Then you're wrong. They're easy peasy to make that decision. All right? So Muslims have an obligation to command the right. It's a communal obligation. In other words, it's binding upon everybody, right? There are levels of censure. There are levels of severity. So, for instance, you have to know what is wrong and what is right. So Muslims must have some concept of what is right and wrong according to the Sharia. Now you must understand Islam doesn't have a sense of morality. We have under Christian doctrine a sense of morals, right and wrong as a sense, right? Based on God's law, moral law. Islam doesn't have morality. It has legal and illegal. It has haram and halal. Islam doesn't have morality. It has right and wrong. These are legal concepts. These are defined in the Sharia, described in the Sharia. But also, because it's a legal concept based on a legal system, there are loopholes in the law where you can violate and bypass the law. There are extenuating circumstances which allow you to completely toss the law out and do something else, which is legal. So there are legal loopholes and there are exceptions. You must understand this. Now, Muslims must act according to a scale, and this is the scale here. So they must have knowledge of the wrong act. So Muslims must have some knowledge of the Sharia, whether they learn it from their parents or in the mosque or whatever, but it's part of the cultural heritage. Now, they must be able to explain that something is wrong. Then they must forbid the act verbally. Then a Muslim has to censure you with harsh words. Now, when they use harsh words, they mean foul language, to swear at you, to insult your mother, to belittle you, humiliate you, undermine you, speak in a very, very dirty manner to you. Okay, that's harsh words. Then they must right the wrong by hand. I don't mean pick up a pen and write the word wrong. I mean write the wrong by hand. Okay, I mean, so hopefully people sort of get the idea what I mean here. You must write the wrong by hand.
He's
right?
holding up fists for those listening.
Right, and then intimidation. Notice, as remember, this is the perfect religion. Then says your next step is intimidation, assault, and force of arms. These are religious rulings in the Sharia. Intimidation, assault, force of arms. Would you consider that Christian?
Yeah, I was
Or
just gonna
Buddhist for that
say,
matter?
like, would be like, this is like so, like, this doesn't even seem like in the same category of being a religion from what I've.
You understand?
This is
So-
it's crazy.
So it says here, commanding the right and forbidding the wrong is the most important fundamental of the religion. This is the mission that Allah sent the prophets to fulfill, and that includes the Muslim prophets like Abraham, David, all of those Muslim prophets, Jesus. And so, if this were not done, religion itself, Islam, would vanish. So this is the obligation, okay? And it states here that let there be a group of you who call to good, commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. For those are the successful. So that is important. That's Quran 3:104. And these are the people who are acting on the concept of azima, right? So let me just run. I'm not going to do all of this. Whoever of you sees something is wrong, let him change it with his hand. If you can't change it with your hand, then change it with your tongue. And if you can't, with your heart. But that is the weakest degree of faith. So if you can't change it with your hand, then you're not a great Muslim, are you? Now, there's a lot to be said here. Again, I cover this in depth on my channel, okay? And they discuss this. So let me see here. I want to go to the sections where they talk about what may be censored, but I want to talk about the use of force.
Yeah, guys, this is like you guys need to go to if you're someone like me that loves information, that loves like just history, deep dives, like you guys need to follow his channel for sure.
So you mentioned now, why do they do this and what makes them carry out these violent deeds and what makes them stop? So let's look at intimidation, Q 5.7. The sixth degree is threatening and intimidation by saying, stop this or I will. And when possible, this should precede actually hitting the person.
Wow.
So remember, do you remember in James chapter 3, verse, hang on. I just got it wrong. We have to look in the most violent book in the Bible, the book of Acts, which teaches that which James says, when someone doesn't obey, pick up your axe and beat them, right? Am I getting this? No. Actually, hold on. No,
that one.
I don't remember that one either. But in Islam, they
weird.
teach you, when possible, you should threaten them before actually hitting them. So here you got Islam teaching in its religious law, the perfect, remember, the absolutely perfect law of Allah, which Muslims will refuse to discuss with you. They will absolutely, in 4 years, I've asked Muslims on my channel, every single Muslim who comments on my channel, I say, please let's meet, let's talk, let's open these books, let's read them publicly. Give me your input. I will read these verses, these passages from the Sharia, from the greatest scholars in Islam to ever live, and just let's talk about this. And they refuse because they are not allowed to, because it will embarrass Islam. So now notice the rule for this level is not to make a threat that you cannot carry out. So you only, okay? And then you move to assault. The 7th degree is to directly hit or kick the person, or similar measures that do not involve weapons. And this is permissible for private individuals. That's fantastic. The 8th degree is when one is unable to essentially act by oneself and requires the armed assistance of others. And Muslims say, but you see, that's an act of war, and you have to go to the caliph, and there's no caliphs. Well, it says here there is no need for the caliph's permission. So do you think that this is what we would call godly? The religion of peace, or the religion of we will get a gang and shoot you to death?
Yeah, that's tough. I would say, I mean, that's tough to refute. I've heard people say like even if we're taking one instance, because I don't know why this came to mind, like, oh, well, if you perform something that's jihad or something that is for religious purposes, then you get all these virgins in heaven. Is that like a thing, or is that like some sort of...
I mean, of course you get reward in heaven, but few people realize. So according to the standard sources that we are given by Muslims, the highest reward for a lay Muslim is given when you die in jihad, when you are involved in violent jihad for the sake of Allah and you are killed, right? And if you kill and not killed, you will earn a place in heaven that's 100 levels greater than the Muslim who just died in his bed. But few people realize that that doesn't stop there. There are greater levels even than that. So there's discussion within, again, it's on my channel. If you look at my videos discussing like the doctrine of lying in Islam and the doctrine of jihad or demis and jizya, how that works, there are higher levels. Like for instance, a Muslim who lies to non-Muslims to keep the peace is also doing jihad. He defends Islam through his lies and through maintaining an animosity towards non-Muslims while not revealing it. That also earns him the equivalent of jihad and sometimes greater. And then scholars have an even greater level of reward, which is even higher than those who die in jihad, because they are the ones who practice the gnosis. And those who practice the gnosis have the absolute highest level. They can reach up to the same level as Muhammad and Allah.
Wow.
I know I'm saying things that are very probably unfamiliar to you and to most people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, we've heard of these things. Like for me, I've heard of these things, but then I've heard it be debunked, right? And then I'm like, okay, well, then I'm back in the state of like kind of not knowing. And then, someone might come in with a good resource, and then they come in and be like, no, like, don't get it twisted. This is how it is. This is what's written down. Because again, if you're allowed to lie, what can you believe? I mean, I try to navigate the world with having relative confident in people they're not gonna publicly say something that is a blatant lie. I always kind of listen with a grain of salt, but you got to understand, what frame or hardware are they coming from? Like, what's their operating system? Is their operating system giving them a particular license to lie? If that's yes, then that's very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, with jihad, the caliph fights all other peoples until they become Muslim. But if there is no caliph, then that responsibility falls upon the individual Muslim. Or that responsibility falls upon the most senior Muslim, the imam. That's why the imams are often responsible for calling jihad and for having weapons stored in their mosques in the basement. So the caliph fights all peoples until they become Muslim. Okay?
Wow.
And also notice it says here, Jesus will rule by the law of Muhammad. So Jesus is actually a Muslim, and he will follow the Sharia behind Muhammad. Jesus will be a follower of Muhammad. And this does not contradict the final coming of Jesus, since Jesus will not rule according to the Evangel, the New Testament, but as a follower of our prophet. That is taught in the Sharia.
Jesus, and to be honest, that doesn't surprise me, because the thing is, like, you got it. Like sometimes people's words and their actions don't line up. Like, for example, right? Like they say, oh, okay, well, Jesus is still, the biggest prophet. He's the biggest name in our religion in Islam, but I don't really hear people being named Jesus as much as Muhammad. I don't hear people talking about Jesus as much as they talk about Muhammad. There's just certain things that you just don't see, things that are like lined up to where it's like, nah, like I think Muhammad's your main guy. Like you can think that
he
Jesus,
is.
yeah, like it doesn't really add up from actions, right? They can say it, but just actions. It seems like this ain't your side. This ain't your mistress. This is your main. If you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's another Sharia manual which goes into much more detail. The Reliance is like a compendium. It has a little bit of everything. And people will say, no, it's only a state of war. No, Islam is permanently at war until all the world becomes Muslim. So this war is the war against unbelief, right? So the war continues until they become Muslim. So this is very clear. And fight those who do not believe in Allah. They explain these verses. So the caliph makes war. Now remember, if there's no caliph, this falls upon Muslims. There must always be a group of Muslims fighting in the condition of azima, right? So the caliph makes war upon Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians. That's the objectives of jihad. Okay?
Wow.
And now notice here, for instance, I'll show you an example of the contradiction. Whatever you see in the Sharia, you can find a contradiction. Whatever is in the Quran, something that says peace, you can find the exact opposite. That's just constant in Islam. It is offensive to conduct a military expedition against hostile non-Muslims without the caliph's permission. So don't do it, you bad Muslims. Although if there's no caliph, then no permission is required. So just go ahead and do it.
Wow, that's interesting.
You understand? You will find this everywhere within the Sharia. So we need to go to the formal definition. Okay? The formal definition of jihad.
for people that like are listening, maybe they haven't really been raised in a religious household or aren't really familiar with scripture, like even if this doesn't even sound like anything in the ballpark of any other religion. Like this is stuff that's like, if you would read this and you grew up, maybe you didn't know the Bible by heart, but you would know like this stuff is not in the Bible. Like, for a fact, just because it's just inconsistent.
No, that's because the Bible was corrupted by the Jews. You see, the Jews rewrote the Bible and they took out all of this stuff. And then Muhammad came along in the 7th century and brought the Bible back. He had the original Injil, you see, except he lost it and they don't have a copy right now. But the Bible's definitely been edited. They just don't have an original copy. They lost their copies too. Really unfortunate, but hey, we've just happened to have the Quran for you.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Like 500 years. I mean, for those who don't know, 500 years, 600 years after Jesus died, Muhammad lived. Is that correct?
630s he died. So apparently born 570, died 632, supposedly.
But he has that real word.
Yeah. So notice it is kufr, right? It is blasphemy, and kufr is a capital punishment crime. To deny that Allah intended the Prophet's message, to deny that Allah wanted Islam to be the religion followed by the entire world. It is kufr, okay? To admit any kind of ecumenicism. Now, jihad means to war against non-Muslims, and is derived from the word mujahada, signifying warfare to establish the religion. That is the legal definition. Now, a better resource than this one, which goes into far more detail, has like 120 pages on the topic, would be the Hedaya. Okay, but now they say here the scriptural basis for jihad prior to scholarly consensus are the Quranic verses. Fighting is prescribed for you. Quran 2:216. Slay them wherever you find them and fight the idolaters utterly. Verses 936 and 489. Now, Muslims will argue high and low, but the Sharia, the problem is the Sharia is black and white, very clear, no ambiguity. The Sharia says these verses mean this.
Wow. Yeah, I would say maybe as a pushback, like this is the common thing that people talk about. They're like, oh, well, in Deuteronomy, in maybe the end of Exodus, maybe not Exodus, but mainly Deuteronomy, I would say, they talk about how, there's just atrocities in the Old Testament. They say,
Okay,
oh,
the book of Deuteroscopy is historical, right? So there's a difference between describing a history and providing a command that is valid for all time, binding upon all people in all places. Deuteronomy is not binding for all people upon in all places. That is a story, it's a history, it's a discussion, right? Whereas what is in the Quran is supposedly the perfect actions by the perfect man following the perfect law of the perfect Allah. And this is valid for all time upon all men, right? So there's a very great difference. There are multiple minor and major covenants in the Bible, and the Old Testament, according to Christian belief, was taken over by the New Testament, fulfilled in Jesus, and then you have a New Testament. So some of the laws, if you look at 2 Peter, I believe it is, where they say that there was the whole discussion with the Judaizers, and you had the very first Council of Jerusalem, where it was decided that the Gentiles in Syria, in Antioch, were not required to follow the Mosaic law in full. So the aspects of the Mosaic law that were decided at the very first Council of Jerusalem by the apostles was, for instance, to abstain from fornication, from drinking blood of living animals and strangling and eating those things. And there was no need to perform circumcision. So there are certain of these laws that are still binding, but the rest are not. So Islam has a very different exegesis than does the Bible. There is no book of Acts, right? There's a book of Acts, right? Whereas Islam teaches explicitly, remember, it's a legal system. Let me go here. Let me just show you this, for instance. Islam calls itself a deen. What is a deen? According to its own definitions, it's a socio-political system, right? It's a political framework for managing mankind's affairs. And within the linguistic meaning, we have to go to 2 major sources. The 2 most famous Arabic dictionaries are the Al-Qamus al-Muhit and the Lisan al-Arab. And each one has like 20 volumes, right? And they both state there are 4 meanings of the word deen. The first one is subjugation and dominance, which entails ownership, government, administrative or legislative authority. Do you see any mention of religion in there or spirituality? Because I'm missing it. Obedience and bondage, meaning subordination, dominance under the power of others. See anything spiritual in that? Then rules, regulations, doctrine, ideology, tradition, or religion. See? Now, if you look at it this way, so the first meaning, according to these Muslim dictionaries, the first meaning is subjugation or dominance, administrative or legislative authority, to put pressure to be obedient, or using power to enslave or make one obedient. Right? I subjugated them, so they obeyed me. And this also means I ruled or governed upon him. Thus, the word dayan is used to indicate a person who dominates and rules over a state, a nation, or a tribe. That's the Muslim definition there. So the second meaning is obedience and bondage, subordination and domination by someone, and bearing humiliation under subjugation and power of the Muslims. So here, al-din does not mean religion, it means obedience. And obedience under the subjugation and domination of the Muslims. Now, if you look at it like this on a chart, now there's different ways of rearranging this, right? But they give you 12 different categories of the meaning of the word deen, and religion is optional and it is 10th. And we focus here and we ignore all the rest.
Wow. Yeah, I think there's a different like mentality when you go into each text. Like definitely the, I guess, psychology or the way it's maybe structured in Islam is more of like, this is what you have to do, this is what you need to do. It is more of rules, when the Bible is definitely like different types of things. I mean, it's poetry, it's rules, it's philosophies, it's advice,
Yeah.
it's harsh rulings. Like even if you go to the Old Testament, when you talk about those things, it's not necessarily saying like, oh well, it's all like I heard the guy in the debate. He was like, oh well, some people say it's fables. Like some people think it's like fables made for us to learn certain lessons, which may be some of it, but I don't like. it's written in a very like, this is what happened, and guess what, we need, like, it even tells stories like of Moses. Moses talks to God, and he's like, how are they going to listen to me, dude? Like, I can't just like say these things and have them listen to me. Like, I can't, I have a speech impediment. Like, I can't even speak. Like, I don't want to be blasphemous and like, and paraphrase, but he was like, throw your staff on the ground and it'll turn into a snake. And then they'll know like who they're dealing with. So like showing proof of things was always an important thing, even in the first book of the Bible. So like saying it's like just, oh, fables, whatever. But again, context matters. Like, it's not written in the sense of like what we think of today. Like, these people in the Old Testament, they had, they're set apart people. They were going to be the first, Israelites. So there was going to be some harsh rules, right? God really revealed himself to them in different ways to show like, hey, you need to kind of get on my program, or else, we got to figure out what's going on.
Right. You spoke of what the Muslims were saying. So understand dawah. If we go to now this is the Encyclopedia of Islam, which I use regularly. This is the gold standard, the gold academic standard. And when you look at the authors, I mean, you're going to see this is running for over a century now, this particular work. It comprises, there's at least 13 volumes or more. It's updated on a quarterly basis, I believe, and it costs about 36,000 euros to buy a copy. About $42,000 to buy a copy of it, and you can rent it for like $5,000 a year if you'd like, if you want to save a little bit of money. So this is not just written by Orientalists who hate Islam. This is the gold standard in Islamic academic knowledge. All right, this is extremely detailed. Like I said, it's huge. Now, dawah. Notice it can mean call, and it can mean invitation to Islam. They don't have to be truthful to you. They just have to bring you into Islam. But notice propaganda. See, dawah also means propaganda. It also means pretension. Now, everyone's going to go, well, Lord, the word according to the Western dictionary means blah, 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 blah. The fact is the Muslims aren't using your dictionary, so really I don't care. So this means to pretend, to lie. See, so dawah is propaganda. Now, notice here, under the Abbasid dynasty, dawah was, strictly speaking, propaganda for a member of the Prophet's family and propaganda for the Imam, who alone could give mankind good guidance. So in the 9th century, when there were these conflicts, these theological conflicts, the Abbasid dynasty paid rhetoricians, they paid sophists, propagandists to write counter arguments to the arguments that they were facing from the Christians and others, and within splits within their own ranks. So they created a very, very efficient, paid, state-backed, state-run propaganda machine to write dawah, to write government propaganda to promote Islam, to promote a particular view of Islam. So dawah is propaganda. It says here, strictly speaking, propaganda. So understand, you're not looking at, when you say evangelization, that does not have the connotation of to lie. It doesn't have the connotation of political overtones. Whereas dawah is government propaganda.
Wow. Yeah, I guess I always think of, that one, Muslim kid, and, what do they know that they're a part of? What, like, how, I mean, for me, even as someone who, is a follower of Jesus, you gotta, take certain things for granted. And not everyone can do their research about every religion, which they probably should, especially if they're going to be part of one. But what do you think? I mean, we've already kind of talked about most Muslims don't really know what they're getting themselves into, but what do you think is kind of your prediction of how things will move forward? Like, what do you think will happen? Big question. I'm just literally thinking out loud. I know that's a big question.
For instance, the Muslim Brotherhood has a plan by 2028 to destroy America and to make itself politically powerful. Right? They have a 100-year plan, and it would seem they've been very, very successful so far with their plan. Al Qaeda had a plan which was supposed to be finalized, I think, by 2021, which was put back slightly. But it still seems to be, I mean, they're pushing very hard politically. They're using their oil money to infiltrate into governance, to like in the UN, along with the Chinese are very much in control of the UN, but also the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Conference. They have very powerful influence in the UN because they operate as a group. Now, sure, they have their divisions and they are competing, but also they operate as a group. So they are using this influence. If you look at their influence in American universities, for instance, they spend billions subverting American universities and changing people's minds by through the educational institutions. So this is something. On the other hand, the internet, now that we have all of these resources and we've got software that can index and go through thousands of references and bring up keywords and help us to dissect Islam, and now that I'm able to, which I'm able to do because I have specialized software which I can use to search through thousands of references, to index them and key and find things to, and find information that wasn't possible just 1 or 2, 3 years ago, right? Islam is starting to see, I would say it's starting to be examined the way that Christianity was attacked and examined in the 1800s, and it's not faring well. It's the fact that it is Gnostic, the fact that there are some very strong pagan roots to Islam, right? The Babylonian moon religion, the fact that you can find all of these sources and references within the Islamic sources. If you just look, the things that Muslims weren't telling you, Islam, I think, is crumbling. So I think it is on the one hand weakening. So it's just a matter of, they're going to do damage, I think, and they are. If you look in Europe with the boat invasion, right, the boat people, but on the other hand, Islam is crumbling. However, they also are undermining Christianity, and we need to bring back those beliefs so that people can establish their own tradition and their own culture in the face of this social assault. Those are my thoughts.
Interesting. No, thank you for sharing. That's really interesting. That makes a lot of sense. I would say, a lot of people are asked, like, I'm definitely like in that boat. Like, I'm asking certain questions that I don't know why I never asked in the beginning. Like like even randomly, like this girl was posting something with a Moroccan flag in the background. And I was like, what? Sometimes I turn my phone into black and white just to like not have it be so addicting. And it was like a TikTok. And I was like, why do you have like a satanic like star in the background of your because it was no color, so all I saw was like a star symbol that's like very, very like blatantly obvious, like everybody knows. Yeah, exactly. So I saw that, I was like, why are you like so demonic? Like I was kind of giving her crap. I was like, why are you so dark? Like why do you have like, I know you're trying to be edgy, like some people like think it's like edgy or like cool to be like kind of dark. So I was like, she's like, no, it's a Moroccan flag. And I was like, why does a Moroccan flag have a and like it kind of like, and then
this is the pentagram. We would call that the satanic pentagram. Though it's right way up rather than upside down, but that's all the same. So the pentagram is Babylonian, right? It is pagan. It is the symbol for the gods Ishtar and Marduk, and the red here from the flag is from the imams of Yemen. Yemen was traditionally a state where they followed the religion of the moon god Shin, who was the Babylonian moon god, right? They called him a different name. They called him Makkah. You may have heard of a place in Saudi called that, but so they had the god, Makkah. Sound familiar? Never heard of it myself.
It kind of does.
Yeah. So in Yemen, they had the god, what they called Al-Makkah. And Al-Makkah had many, many names. He was also the Allah of the Kaaba, right? So you've got the pentagram as the seal of Solomon, and that's the claim that they make, but it is the pentagram. I mean, this is considered occultic and satanic in a Western Christian context. And the moon is, I mean, you've got Morocco here, and then you've got the moon or the stars are common across, I mean, it's right on top of the mosque, moon and star.
Yeah, and he goes into depth about this stuff, guys. Like, it's so interesting, and it kind of does give a little bit of more of like context to certain things we just think are, that's just what it is, and there's no history in it. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't think people do things on accident. It's very rare.
Yeah, this is a lengthy series, like 5 or 6 episodes, and I go into great detail historically on this. And again, I provide all my sources. I don't hide my sources. My references are there for anyone to download and check for themselves. So I provide all of this stuff for people to check.
Yeah, it kind of just connects dots. Like it simply just connects dots that you you want to connect. And I think a lot of people think certain things were so long ago that there isn't really anything there, any writing, any archaeology to really look back at. So they kind of stop searching past like maybe 1,000, 2,000 years back. And you start to realize like, even if you go back there, there's a lot of stuff that you miss that can kind of reinforce information
Yeah.
that you already have
Look,
to make
people
it
don't
make
realize
sense.
when you read the Sirah, the Gospels of Muhammad, the Muslims very bluntly state they reject Judaism, they reject Christianity. Islam is an they make the claim that Islam is an Abrahamic religion because Abraham was a Muslim, not a Jew, not the first Jew.
Mm.
Abraham was a Muslim, and of course we know within the standard Orthodox view of Abraham, his father was a worshipper of the moon god. His whole family, they are named after the moon god. His family, his uncles, his brothers are all named after various incarnations of the same moon god, different aspects of the moon god. Right? His father Terah is just another name for Shin, another name for Al-Makkah, the same god, the same
Wow.
moon god of Babylon. Abraham himself worshipped the Babylonian moon god. And Islam states bluntly, it follows the religion of Abraham. But they forget to tell you the religion of Abraham before he turned to Yahweh, because that
Wow.
apparently is a false story spread by the Jews. So Islam follows the religion of Abraham before he turned to Yahweh, and he was a moon worshipper of the god of Babylon, the god
Whoa.
Shin. Does that
Whoa.
make sense to you?
Yeah, yeah. No, that is crazy. Yeah. I mean, I've done a little bit of the research and like even just through watching you, it's just been like super interesting. And you're very, you're very thorough. You always provide, you're very skeptical yourself, which is very refreshing because a lot of people will just say things and not provide any resources or not really come back with anything. So it's refreshing to have somebody that provides
Well,
resources
look, I mean, I show my sources on the screen. I'm reading it off the page. This is not my opinion. I'm showing people, look, I'm saying what the words in the book are saying. And here I'm showing these are the Muslims' own books written by the top scholars. Right? I'm not making it up. I'm providing these resources for people, and I've offered to Muslims, let's have a public conversation about this. And they refuse because they realize this is damaging to Islam.
Well, I think even we don't even really need to pick on Islam necessarily. I mean, even scholars that are part of universities, there's certain information they don't want to talk about, they don't want to get into because it's disparaging to their institution, disparaging to
They
this
also don't want
religion,
to get
disparaging to
stabbed in the
that religion.
parking lot to lose their funding from Saudi Arabia.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, it's true. It's just true. So I think independent media, independent people that have no attachments, no connections, I think that they're going to be the only people that you can really, you know, rely on in the sense. So I really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you for coming on. Like for real, guys. Don't forget to like, subscribe to his channel. Also, if you're not subscribed to mine, please like, subscribe. He does a lot of deep dives, a lot of stuff that is going to be. If you're a nerd like me, I mean, I feel like if you're watching and listening to this podcast, you're gonna. If you're listening this far, you probably are the type of person that are going to be super interested in the stuff that he covers. He not only covers it by himself, but also has people on that make it really interesting. So, thank you for coming on. Any final words? Anything you want to? Any way you want to like kind of wrap it up, put a bow on it?
No, not much. I was surprised. We really dove into this at some depth. I mean, the questions, it was a really good flow. Yeah, we had discussed before the show that we might dive into things like Protestant history and so on, which we didn't touch on. So really, this seemed to. But yeah, this was great. I do also go in depth into the history of atheism and socialism
That's
and
good.
also Darwinism. Darwinism is based quite bluntly on paganism, Greek pagan ideas. Um, Atheism is oddly enough is traced to paganism too, which is insane. And the modern history of atheism is steeped in occultism, and also, I mean, just the insanity as a political movement. Looking at the French Revolution and its connection to genocide and atrocity, so these are subjects that I go into these very difficult subjects. I provide extremely detailed talks with my resources, with my citations, with the books available to download. Check for yourself. So yeah, I don't just talk about Islam. I discuss multiple different topics.
Yeah,
And at
atheism
some
is my
point, like,
my favorite. Other than this, like atheism, other than the Islam, like atheism, like how you dive into that because it does affirm things that I've been thinking about, especially being here. You know, it's like you hear people say they're atheists, but they talk about manifestation, chakras, crystals. I'm like, dude, like, do you know what you're doing? Like, is this like you think it's like something that has no connection to anything? You're just, yeah, it's really interesting.
yeah, no. And yeah, so lately I've been doing a talk on Darwin. I just covered Hitler and Hitler's beliefs, Hitler's religion, and whether the claims that Hitler was very much in bed with the Catholic Church. I went into that in depth. I can confirm Hitler was very much in bed with the Protestant Church. He
Mm.
was, yeah. They were serious. They were bed buddies. Hitler and Protestant theologians, very very close, joined at the hip. And yeah, so there's the claims that Hitler was a Christian, the claim that Marx was Christian, Stalin, all of these things. I go into depth on all of these questions, and right now I'm just doing a talk on John Calvin and Calvin's beliefs, and Martin Luther as well. I've covered that, and people have been very upset with my expose on Martin Luther. So yeah, it's bluntly speaking, they were Gnostics. So they
Wow.
were doing they had their own flavor of Gnosticism, and yeah, so it's they created their own version of Gnostianity. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. I mean, I say very blunt things, but I do provide very detailed talks, presentations with citations, with the references, and I don't just use any old fuddy-duddy references. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for watching. Peace.